So, good afternoon everybody. I'm Professor Janet Lord. I'm Professor of Immune Cell Biology based in the medical school. Thank you for attending this lecture, and I hope it's going to be useful. It's an unusual one for me. I was asked to speak on my research journey. So I've never been asked to do this before, so we'll see how it goes. I'm going to plan to speak for about 20 minutes and then have some time for questions. Okay, so I've called it Tales of the Unexpected because I think any journey has some unexpected bits in it, and if there weren't, it would be rather boring, I think. And certainly my career has had that. So the first thing is, I think in your career, try to be flexible. And so one of the things that happened in my life was moving backwards and forwards between two locations, Oxford and Birmingham, most of the time completely unintentionally. So I started my career off doing a degree in human biology at Oxford Brookes, and during that time I was fortunate enough to actually do my undergraduate research project at Oxford University, and as a consequence of that was offered a PhD place there. And then life intervened. I met my now husband, and he's an engineer, and he decided that he's a flood protection engineer, and the thing about Oxford is it doesn't flood at all. So he decided he had to move, and he moved to Birmingham. So then, okay, I had to change my plan, hunted out a PhD, and there was a PhD in the area I was interested in at the time, which was diabetes, at Aston University, so I went to Aston. And towards the end of my PhD, my next bit of my plan was to carry on and do a postdoc in Birmingham. And at the time, there were plans at the university here to develop a new research centre located in the General Hospital in the centre, and managed to secure a place there. And then our first female science Prime Minister came in and promptly reduced the science budget. So the plans for that building went. So I then had to quickly look around for a job, and blow me, where did a great job come up, but back in Oxford at the university. So I went to the Department of Clinical Biochemistry and spent a good time away from my husband. And they say that absence makes the heart grow fonder, but there is a limit, I think. And after 5 years, we thought, well, you know, we better try and live in the same city. So at the time, there was a temporary lectureship going here at Birmingham in the Department of Biochemistry. And so my plan at the time was to come do that lectureship and then persuade hubby that we relocate back to Oxford. And then I came here, and I just love the university so much that I've stayed here for almost 40 years. So be flexible, because I think that flexibility and having a flexible partner who put up with my long absences really helped me to move on in my career. So, other things. Changing topic, I think, I don't know if it's the same in the humanities, but certainly in the STEM subjects. Often changing your pathway is seen as very risky, but my experience is that is not the case. So I started off, I did my PhD in that first postdoc at Oxford in the area of diabetes. And when I came for that one-year lectureship here at Birmingham, at the time, although diabetes is strong now, it wasn't particularly strong at Birmingham. And so in that 1 year, when I decided to stay at Birmingham, I was hunting around, and there was a postdoc job in the immunology department. And what I knew about immunology, you could write on the back of a stamp, really. But they were very interested in the techniques that I knew. So I took the leap and took the postdoc fellowship in immunology, and I've never looked back. I love immunology. And so that was a big career change for me. But I've done it ever since as well. So I started my own group in 1989. I was lucky enough to get a Royal Society University fellowship, which funded me actually for 9 years to develop my own ideas and develop my team, and that was a great time. And that was actually in something sort of allied to immunology. It was in hemopoiesis, in blood production, and what controls the blood production in the body. But during that period, again, I never stay on topics terribly long. And in the department, there were rheumatologists, so people working on rheumatoid arthritis. And I became really interested in that because it has really perturbations of the immune system as part of the disease. And so towards the end of that fellowship period, I started working on rheumatoid arthritis as well. And that actually proved a really good decision because rheumatoid arthritis is an age-related disease. And so inconsequentially, I became interested in human aging, and that's largely what I work on now. So again, that was another change. And I remembered my head of department at the time in my first PDR said to me, "Janet, when are you going to focus on something?" And I said, "Well, probably never, because I like different things, and I think you should go with what you enjoy. If research is a drudge the whole time, I think, well, what's the point really?" And I always say to PhD students coming through that being a good researcher is being able to cope with 90% of the time of just repeating things over and over and over again and going down blind alleys. And we live for the 10% of the time when we discover something new and we have that amazing elation. And it might be getting a paper published or a grant, but we live for small amounts of time of elation. So I think we're pretty good at being starved of enjoyment most of the time. So I think variety is what helped me get through. And then this interest in aging has led me on to more recent slight changes in what I do. So I became very interested in, I attended a lecture up at the medical school by one of the plastic surgeons there who was talking about scarring. And he said just one sentence, "It's very interesting that the very young and the very old scar less." So any sort of an injury and you produce a milder scar, and the periods in between you have really quite profound scarring with a bad injury. And I thought, that's interesting. And so then began to work with that medic, Professor Moyman, and now we have a very active programme in trying to understand scarring and trying to develop treatments to prevent scarring. And then as a consequence of that, or around the same time, again, attending other lectures and reading sort of beyond my core topic, I was reading around and found that people who have any sort of a major trauma have shorter lifespans, even though they've recovered from the trauma. It could be a traffic accident, for example. And they develop age-related diseases about 10 years earlier than somebody who didn't have a trauma. And so I thought, well, I wonder if having a trauma accelerates biological aging. And so that led me on to some of the work I do now, working with the military and working with the trauma centre up at the university. And sure enough, we have found that it accelerates ageing. And this is not just a scientific curiosity with a lot of, well, I think with all of the research I've done, I always want to use it to improve health. And so fortunately, human ageing research has really come on leaps and bounds. And we now have ways to actually reverse biological ageing. And so the plans for the future are to carry out clinical trials in trauma survivors to try to turn back their aging clocks. So move around, don't be scared to move your topic. It certainly didn't do me any harm, and I think makes research much more interesting. I've also got there thinking about, as I said, I think you have to be quite determined in research, and you'll see that through that timeline, it's a long timeline to really secure your career. So I started off with that Royal Society Fellowship, then 9 years later joined staff at the university, and then it was another, another 6-7 years before I got my chair, and then finally became a head of school another 9 years after that. So it is a slow progression, so you've got to be able to stick with that as well. So the next sort of tip is pick a big or topical subject if you can. And so I told you I became interested in ageing, and it was an interesting topic, I think, and it's something that's completely cross-disciplinary. You can work on ageing from a humanities point of view, from an engineering point of view, and from a biomedical point of view. And this is why it's interesting and is actually a big topic in the UK. No matter what discipline you're in, there's big funding in this area. And this is why. So on the bottom here in these data from 1984 to 2009, these are young people, so birth rates are falling, and most of you will know that. And up in the sort of lighter blue here, these are the over 65-year-olds. And in that 25-year period, we'd acquired another 1.7 million over 65-year-olds. So we are an ageing society. But the group that are aging at the fastest rate are the dark blue at the top, and they are the over 85-year-olds, and we call them the oldest old in aging research. And their numbers doubled in that to 1.4 million in that 25-year period. And the prediction is that 1 in 4 of the population will be over 65 by 2034, so really dramatic change, and 5% will be over 85. And the tradition in the UK of sending a letter to everybody who gets to be 100 from the monarch was started in 1917 by George V. And would anybody in the audience, because you've been sat there far too long and far too silent, like to guess, we might have some historians, I guess, in the audience, how many letters George V sent out? So how many centenarians did we have? Somebody brave and bold, have a go. 1917, how many centenarians?
1,000.
Oh, way off, way off. Optimistic, but way off. 9. How many did Queen Elizabeth send out in the final year she sent the letters out? So 2021, how many? 13,500. So just over 100 years, massive change. But the problem is we're living longer, but we're not living healthier. So life expectancy is increasing. It's actually steadying down. The last 5 years, it hasn't increased. We think this is partly the pandemic, but also partly the obesity epidemic and things like that. So for the first time in the last sense, it's slowing down. And this is one of the reasons, respiratory disease. So we know that the older you are, the increased chance of you developing diseases. So the more older people, unless we can keep people in good health, this is, again, significant challenge to the NHS. This is respiratory disease overall, and this is COVID-19. So over 90% of those who passed away with COVID-19 were the 70-year-olds and above. So it was very much an age-related disease. So tip number 2 is if you can, work with people from other disciplines. I know it doesn't work in all fields, but try and get really good colleagues. So in biomedical science, I'm not a medic. I'm, as I said, trained as a human biologist and an immunologist, but this lovely lady, Liz Sapey, who took over from me as Institute Director, is a clinician, and I worked with her early on to try to understand, well, why is it that older people get more infections? I said I was always curious. And so we started to look at this critter. I've got to have some science in, can't I? I can't have a talk without science. This is the neutrophil, your most abundant white cell. And to do its job, it has to leave the blood, go to wherever the infection is, so say in the lungs if it's pneumonia. And when it gets there, it literally eats it, phagocytoses the bacteria, and then kills it. And so we did some research with Liz, saying, well, let's look at how good the neutrophils are at getting to where they should be. And so we put them under the microscope, give them some bacteria, and video them moving towards it. So imagine on the top of the screen here, this is where the bacteria are, and these are the neutrophils, start point and end point. And this is a young person's neutrophils, lovely straight lines. Look at these guys down here, these are the over 65s. These are healthy elders. You can see, you don't need to be a professor of immunology to see there's a problem here. They got backwards, sideways, they wiggle around a lot. So basically they've lost their sat-nav. So it takes them a long time to get to the infection. And so with Liz, we worked together and we tried to find out why this was. And we developed an intervention. We used an existing drug called statins, which we found that could improve this problem. So here's the young person's neutrophils without and with statin, no difference because there's no problem. Here's the old person's neutrophils without statin and then with statin, corrects it completely, just 30 minutes. So we then carried out a clinical trial, and this is survival. So we gave statins to patients coming into the QE with pneumonia for just 7 days and then tracked them. This is the survival curve, this grey line here of those who did not have statins and those who did. So we reduced deaths by 40%, just giving statins for 7 days. So they never let me run a clinical trial, I'm not a clinician, but working with clinicians, we could go from basic science to an intervention. Okay, tip number 3, be bold. Say yes a lot. We're always saying, what's your time, life balance, work balance. Don't overwork yourself. I've never been very good at that. So I've just some examples here. So early in my career, I volunteered to become a sort of an officer in the Learned Society that I was in at the time. And it's extra work. You're organising conferences, but you learn how you really network with people. You meet lots of people. I also organised the seminar programme in my department. Again, more work, but I met people. I met the seminar speakers. I met lots of people. BSRA, the British Society for Research onto Ageing, that early involvement led me to eventually be chair of that organisation. From that, I was then involved later on. I was on the grants panel for Age UK, and then Age UK asked me to be a trustee, another fascinating thing. And then from that, as a result of all that, I was asked to be a special advisor in the House of Lords inquiry into the biology of ageing, which we reported in 2021, and that was fascinating. If anyone's questions about alternative careers, the clerks who support those inquiries are amazing, and they've usually got PhDs. They're very fond of STEM subjects, but anybody can apply for them. It's a really interesting career for you to think about. Okay, another one, have a plan. So here's an alternative word for career, a headlong progression downhill, usually out of control, and that's a bit what my early career was like. So to be honest, as a STEM subject, I just like being a postdoc. I love being in the lab, and I really didn't think about much beyond that. There's no pressure, you're just generating data, you get home at night, chill out, and that's it. And then reality struck. So I got to the age of 31, I'd done 2 postdocs and that temporary lectureship. I'd been in 3 different departments, 2 different universities. I had a mortgage, yet another short-term contract. We love those, don't we? A young child and no cunning plan at all. So definitely get a plan. So tip number 4, have a career development plan. So my first thing was, do I want to stay in academia? So I was telling some of the organisers earlier, I had a little jaunt trying to get out of academia. So I had 2 interviews for industry. And after the second failed one, I asked one of the panel members, I said, why didn't I get the job? And he said, Janet, if I cut you in half, you'd have academic written through the middle of you. He said, you would hate industry. So because there's basically no freedom, you're told what to work on. So that was a good decision. So what do you need to do for a career in academia? Some of you will know this. Well, publish papers. We have lots of papers, flurries of papers. Make sure they're good papers that are read. I would advise taking on teaching and supervisory experience. You often think, well, does it really help my CV, or is my head of department or my line manager just trying to get me to do some of their teaching? But no, I'd really advise it. It's good experience. Have national visibility if you can. Speak at conferences, and work for those learned societies. They really get you that visibility. Grant writing, your own fellowship, it really is the way forward. So please try to do that if you can. And think of that early. I left it way too late. I was already, 6 years postdoc when I tried. And a lot of the fellowships have limitations on them of how many years postdoc you can be. So don't leave it too late. Reviewing, again, your PI may ask you to review a grant or a paper. Do it, because that way you will see good and bad grants, good and bad papers, and it will help your writing experience. Working abroad, less sure about that. I never did it myself, but it is one of my slight regrets. I had a month abroad in my PhD in France, and that was a good experience, but various life things happened and I never actually got abroad. But again, it hasn't held me back, so I'd say not to worry too much. So having a plan, as I say, doesn't guarantee success, but it does put you more in control. Tip number 5, network as much as you can. It's hard, you go to conferences, and particularly when you're quite junior, you think, I can't go and talk to that PI or that speaker. Do it. We don't mind, we really don't. So I was speaking at before the pandemic, a conference in Brazil, and a young lady came up and spoke to me, talked about her research, and 9 months later contacted me, said, I really want to come to the UK. She put in an application for a fellowship, and she's now working with me. It was funded by the Academy of Medical Sciences. So there you go, talk to somebody at a conference. As I said, visits abroad, hosting seminar speakers, direct contact learning. I've done all of that already. I'm just careful I don't want to run out of time. Get a mentor. I never did this until quite late in my career. In fact, I'd already got my permanent position when I first got a mentor. So I would say somebody with a bit more experience than you, they don't have to be miles senior to you, somebody who's a critical friend to you, who can really perhaps give you some advice. I think they work best if they're not, it's certainly not in your department, and certainly mine were actually outside of the university. The first one was in industry, and the second one was the two next ones were both at different universities from this one. Pick somebody who'll give you time. Some societies actually have formal mentorship programs, so the Academy of Medical Sciences do, so I'm a mentor for that. But otherwise, most departments and universities will have them, so do take that up. And, you know, also move on. Don't keep the same mentor. They're useful at different stages of your career. And the last one, tip number 7, work with really nice, great people. I've been so lucky. This is my team fairly recently, 5 of whom have now got their own faculty positions, 3 in industry, 1 in scientific writing, 1 retired. So that's my last tip. Work with nice people and work in a team. Thank you. I'll take questions. Is Einstein in the audience? Einstein was actually asked that question towards the end of his career by a radio interviewer, and he said humanity. So I would think throughout your career, have integrity, care about other people, be kind. It is a race to get to the top, but never lose your humanity. That's it. I think that's simple as that. I think certainly when I did my PhD, to be honest, my supervisor was not great, really not great. And in fact, 3 months in, I went to see the head of department and said I want a different supervisor. And that was quite frightening, quite terrified me. Luckily, the head of department did change the supervisor, and so that helped. And that, I think, gave me, I don't know, the sort of, to know that I can change something as profound as that and still survive, but it was a bad experience, a very bad experience. And I did nearly leave research, it was so bad. But that I think made me more independent, and even with my second supervisor, I was left very much to my own devices. Things have changed now, and anybody who wants to get a PhD as a supervisor has to bid for the funds. But in those days, this is a long time ago, departments just had a core pot for PhDs, and they were given out by the head of department. And so there was, you know, a lot of nepotism going on there. If the head of department, you know, didn't like the particular researcher, they might not get any studentship. So thank goodness that has gone. But I learnt to stand on my own 2 feet because my supervisor really wasn't terribly supportive, even the second one. It was a tough journey, it was a really tough one, but it did make me very independent. Yeah. I go out for a run basically. So I try to put my science into practice. So I'm a keen runner. I run every morning. So if things are going bad, I do a longer run than normal. I found it's a stress reliever. But often I talk it through with colleagues, talk things through with people. Don't bottle it up. It can be anything that goes wrong. You know, a grant goes down and you can kick the filing cabinet and things. But often just, yeah, talk it through with people. Yeah. Oh gosh, I think my biggest regret is not working abroad. So when it was before I got my chair, I wanted to go to Japan. I'd been to a conference in Japan and fell in love with the country. And it's a big place for aging research. And so I learnt Japanese. I spent 3 years learning Japanese because on that first trip I realised you can't really survive there without knowing some Japanese. You get into all sorts of terrible situations, like me going into a hot tub that the sign on the door said men. And if ever you've been to Japan, you know you have to take all your clothes off first. So when I opened the door to the hot tub area, it was a bit of a shock to find the hot tub full of men. So anyway, quick exit after that. Unfortunately, life intervened and my mother was taken ill, so I had carers' responsibilities for a while. But that's my one regret, not doing a sabbatical. Yeah, that's another good one. So I was the first female professor of immunology at Birmingham. There were no female professors. And so I didn't really have any female role models. But on the humanities side, I would probably say that my head of department, and I won't name him, he's retired now, and he had very few interpersonal skills. And in fact, when he was lecturing, he used to be like this. These were the days when we had acetates, and he would not face the students. He used to be sideways, but he's a very, very shy person. But he was really good to me, very supportive. And I went through another bad patch when my daughter was young. Getting that work-life balance right with a youngster was very, very difficult, and you know, he really helped me through that. So he was sort of my role model, that even though it didn't come naturally to him, he put himself out. Like I say, I used to go to my PDRs with him, and it wouldn't look me in the face even in my PDRs, you know. But he was really, really supportive, yeah.